Morning all, Dan, Vicky, Caroline, thanks so much for joining and welcome to all our viewers. I thought we could start by doing a quick round of introductions. So hi all, I'm Jennifer Hegarty. I'm General Manager for Amtivo in Ireland. Joining me today are Caroline, Vicky and Dan. So Caroline, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi. Thank you very much, Jennifer. My name is Caroline O'Sullivan. I'm the Managing Auditor for Amtivo Ireland.
Vicky, do you want to go next?
Yep. Morning, everyone. I'm Vicky Kliche. I am the Amtivo Group's Information Security Technical Manager. I take care of the information security scheme as well as 42001 scheme as well for the group.
Lovely. And Dan?
Hello, good morning. My name is Dan O'Callaghan and I am part of the sales team within Amtivo Ireland Limited.
Brilliant. So as hopefully you know, Amtivo is a global certification and assurance group. We certify organizations to different standards like ISO 9001, 14001, and of course the new ISO 42001 for AI. We've got over 36,000 certifications live across 27 countries. And we've got more than 500 people. So today you've got 3 of us dialing in from Ireland. And Vicky, I think you're based in the UK, is that right?
Yeah.
Perfect. So look, we audit businesses for a living. So we see exactly what happens when systems don't work very well and we don't manage to prevent these risks. But here today we're talking about the EU AI Act specifically. So this is very relevant for me, of course, for our Irish office thinking about this. And for a lot of our customers with more provisions of the EU AI Act coming into force later this month, highly relevant. So before we kind of dive in, a couple of stats to make us all feel a little uneasy. So a recent McKinsey report mentioned that 88% of firms are now using AI in at least one function, but only 7% are fully scaled. In Ireland, the CSO reported that enterprise AI use has more than doubled over the last 2 years. And I'd actually love to see that stat for the last 3 months because I'd say it's doubled again now. I can really kind of feel the tide turning and I see that across our clients. And in the UK, Microsoft have reported that over 70% of employees have used unapproved AI tools. Obviously, I'm sure none of us here today would ever do that, but we do see that happening with information that people think is harmless and, maybe, but that's also something, a risk that we have to manage. So the broad context here is that people are using AI more and more. Firms are using AI in their systems, but perhaps not necessarily with mature systems rolled out across the organization. And there's kind of lots of prototyping, lots of value being added with individuals, who have been able to, shorten their workflows. But and lots of firms moving fast, but also kind of wildly inconsistent usage and, maybe a struggle to get the right oversights. So, for the EU AI Act specifically, Vicky, why are we talking about this now?
Let's think about what the EU AI Act is. It's governance, basically. AI is on the up. It's here to stay. It does have a place in society, is my opinion. But it's also, it can be very dangerous. And I think that's why we need to discuss aspects and, take note of aspects like the EU AI Act, like ISO 42001, because we need to make sure that we're controlling AI in its uses in order to be able to utilise it to its full capacity. But in a safe manner, shall I say?
Yeah, absolutely. And so thinking about kind of the different provisions of the Act, for those who aren't familiar, can you kind of set out for us what's in provision already, what's coming into provision later?
So I'd like to kind of start again, if I could, with why it matters. So most people assume that the AI Act is something that's still on the horizon. In parts, it is in force already, and it's also it's notable that we've got this phased approach coming in as well. So I think since February 2025, there's been a ban on unacceptable risk AI, which I don't think a lot of people have fully grasped what that is. And that's that danger piece coming in that I was kind of touching upon earlier. Aspects like scoring or manipulative AI systems, etc. That's already legally binding within the Act. Again, a point that people don't really fully understand at this stage. And obviously there's new AI literacy obligations for staff being kicked off at the same time. So other obligations that apply since August 2025, there's actually been another layer of the AI Act that's landed, which is the rules for general purpose AI models, aspects like ChatGPT style foundation models. They've become applicable. At the same time, the EU's governance structures like the AI Office were stood up. And right now, 2 major sets of obligations are already live and enforceable again. On top of that, more requirements follow on their own separate timelines. The bulk of the remaining act, including transparency rules like labelling AI-generated content, that becomes applicable from the 2nd of August 2026, which is another notable milestone that people should be aware of. And then later on, there are the higher risk flows coming in, which again is something that everyone should be abundantly aware of. That's the part that I think people get wrong. We need to be thinking along the lines of recruitment tools, biometrics, education, critical infrastructure, all very, very important aspects. These will follow later on. There have been some simplification changes agreed in Brussels, I believe, of this year. Those obligations have actually been pushed back to December 2027. And August 2028 for AI embedded into regulated products is another notable milestone. I think a key takeaway for me is that the Act, we shouldn't assume that the Act isn't fully enforced yet. So therefore, people don't need to take awareness or have an awareness of it. They don't need to take any actions as of yet. That's not it. It is very much here. It is very much coming. It is very, very, very important, especially to those businesses that are operating within the EU jurisdictions. Classification and governance work for me should start now. It shouldn't just be a paper set. People need to be putting plans into action already to be ready for it.
So a phased timeline, but it's already here. So
exactly
it's not the case that you can wait for them to fully roll it out before you start worrying. You need to already be thinking about this. And of course, super relevant for businesses here in Ireland. But, if I'm a business in the UK, no longer in the EU, so sure, they don't need to worry at all, do they, Caroline?
Sorry?
I was saying businesses in the UK, sure, they're grand. They don't need to worry about this.
Oh, I wouldn't say that now. That would be, that's what we would call risky think.
So tell me.
Yeah, so look, I suppose I would kind of encourage businesses to think GDPR kind of risk. From the perspective of the preparation that businesses went through when the EU brought in the GDPR Act. Now, at the time, the UK was in the thrust of Brexit, etc. But the reality is that they have their own GDPR policies and requirements, but they are very, very similar to the EU GDPR Act. And I don't think that the AI requirements and regulation in the UK is going to be very far away from the EU. The reality of it is that you need to, as a business, you need to kind of look at what category you sit into from an AI model and development perspective. If you're an importer, you're bringing it in from outside the EU, you're held by that regulation and you'll be held to account by that regulation. If you are a AI developer who is selling outside of the UK, you're in scope. If you're selling into the EU, if you're a UK business selling into the States, you're not. Okay, so it's around what third countries are distributing around the EU as well. And that will include the United States. It will include Australia and any AI models that are used for any reason in the EU. So again, very similar to data protection, I would almost say, in that the attention that was given to GDPR implementation should be amplified here in a very, very big way. Again, we're looking at the kind of fiduciary responsibilities of individuals who are using AI or implementing, bringing it into their business, but I don't think anybody's immune from this. Europe is a very big place. The Commission is using its clout. It's the EU AI Act is the first of its kind, and it's extremely broad reaching. I think it would be a mistake to think that this is the end of the EU AI Act, because it generally, at the minute, most of it refers to high risk or prohibited AI models. However, I think that with the AI models that are available and being implemented at the minute, that's where the AI Act and the requirements of that are going to come to pass. Essentially, for businesses who intend to use AI, the ISO 42000 is not, if you're certified, it's not going to mean that you are compliant with the EU AI Act, but it's going to put you on the way very strongly, just like all the other ISO standards. If you are using 9000, you're already very, very customer centric. And one of the huge parts of the AI Act is about responsible use.
Customer centricity. The maybe Vicky, would you add in a kind of a note there on what sorts of factors UK clients might want to consider, customers, businesses might want to consider when they're thinking about whether this applies?
Yeah, absolutely. So touching upon and expanding upon the point that you made earlier with your metric regarding the level of use of AI. I think at the moment in the UK, about 12%. Businesses use between 12 and 35%, or that's grown from 12% to 35% since 2023. So we can see that exponential growth in the use of AI. It's also rumoured that around 71% of employees are or could be using unapproved AI tools. That's according to a study conducted by Microsoft in October 2025. So that could have even grown even more since that point. So going back to Caroline's point about the importance and the position within the UK, it's exactly the same concept. Just because we're not directly within the EU, it doesn't rule us out. The vast majority of businesses in the UK are operating or handling or dealing with businesses in the EU. Thus, it's equally as important that businesses in the UK that are going to utilise AI for key roles have to have an awareness of it. Brexit doesn't mean that it doesn't touch us. Essentially, it absolutely does. And UK businesses, as I mentioned, should treat it with just as much importance, in my opinion, in order to embed the utilisation of AI into your business sufficiently and compliantly, for that matter.
It's a real path to thread, isn't it, of making sure that we're harnessing, these new systems, but also that we have the right oversights in place. And Dan, I guess thinking about, what you're seeing with our clients, we deal with businesses across Ireland and the UK, what kind of questions are coming from them? Is it pressure from their own customers, from procurement? What types of factors are affecting their questions?
First of all, it's interesting with a lot of people that we're speaking to, whether it be existing clients for a number of different standards or for potential new business. They are, in the past, they would have, if they hold an information security framework or align themselves to it, they would have done that because of tender opportunities. They needed to have it. Clients were looking and demanding that they have that particular framework in place or at least certified. Now they're asking themselves, and they need to get ahead of the curve. They know that internally, who is responsible for AI within our organization? Who has governance? Who owns it? Is it IT? Is it compliance? Or is it legal? So they're at the very early stages of it, but I think anybody that's engaged with the Act currently, I think they're one step ahead, and they're at least exploring as to what they need to do. So I think if I'm comparing it to obviously 27001 is an important standard for our organization.
And what is 27001 for any viewers who might not be familiar, Dan?
Information security management system. It's a key standard within our organization, and a key standard for many organizations, whether they're small, medium, or large organizations. So those same organizations are looking, okay, we've got this information security framework in place. How best can we utilize that, or at least consider that framework and how it applies to the EU AI Act and what we should be considering? And as I say, it's around governance and who owns it within our organization.
And making sure that we have it like clear home. I feel like to start with, it was often, sitting within the IT group in a company, but increasingly that's then, people from different departments are getting involved, and as is right and proper, to make sure that we have that right governance systems in place. Sure. I guess you mentioned, Caroline, you mentioned risk earlier, so the different risk levels apportioned to systems. So Vicky, why isn't every use not treated the same? Like, what is this risk-based approach that kind of the EU AI Act is using?
So the EU AI Act recognises the, without repeating myself, the level of risk associated, or let's say what could happen in terms of when you're utilising AI for different purposes. So if you're utilising AI to make decisions for you, the EU AI Act recognises that there is going to be a level of risk associated with that purpose. So, if you're making, let's take financial services, for example, if you're using decision or AI for making decisions within financial services, it could have incredible consequences if it goes wrong, or if it isn't controlled. And the EU AI Act is trying to capture that and contain that. It's incredibly important that we recognise those risk levels, purely because otherwise, again, it comes down to that control piece. We're never going to know how best to control those risks associated with AI utilisation and that particular purpose.
Mm-hmm. And I guess what's interesting about what you said there is it's the use, the purpose, and the context rather than the tool itself. So you might be sitting there thinking, oh, I'm grand, I'm a logistics company, we're not using AI, that's fine. But if your HR manager is running CVs through Claude to decide who to hire,
Exactly. Let's not forget that AI has many risks, as we keep mentioning that word, in terms of hallucination, data drift. If they are not controlled, they are not recognised, they are not contained, as I mentioned, those consequences could lead you down quite a dark path, which is why I think it's actually really, really good that the EU AI Act has captured that and tried to enforce that message into businesses and into our governance frameworks, essentially.
So if you're kind of sitting there thinking, okay, I'm responsible for part of a business, and I need to, get myself in order here. Caroline, where would you start? Like, what should you be thinking about? What would you do first?
I think, to be honest, I mentioned operator categories earlier on, and I think that if you're a deployer, or otherwise known as a utilizer of AI in professional practice, not including any personal use of AI, you need to be making sure that your governance structure is right up there. And I think in Ireland, we have a tendency to be, very laid back about things. Oh, yes, it'll be grand and we're going to, yeah, it's all in order. This and the penalties associated with it, not to mention the reputational damage, along with client confidence, market confidence in your management and governance of AI is going to be in very, very big focus. Anything at the moment that is associated with AI that has gone awry, whether it be big or small, whether it has small or huge consequences, is in the papers now. It's up front and it's center. So you need to effectively, you need to have resources in place that are individuals who are competent using the models that they're using, and that they know why they're using it and exactly what it's being used for. At this stage, I would say that you're looking at enforcing data governance policies, not encouraging. This is not an encouragement area, it's an enforcement area. You need to be monitoring and measuring the data that you're actually that you're using with AI. And of course, monitoring and measuring, and it's very much part of, and policies, processes and procedures. ISO, it forces an organization to look at itself very plainly in the mirror. And it forces an organization to ask questions of itself. So have I employed data loss prevention? What kind of risk metrics am I using to determine if I'm going outside the box? I would be very in favor of, life is short, color outside the lines. I like that very much. I wouldn't use that here. I really, really wouldn't. Your regulatory compliance is up there. Remember GDPR, remember the penalties, remember the financial penalties. They're amplified for EU AI Act, and as they should be. There's a huge corporate accountability kind of flavor to 9001, the new about to come 9001. That needs to be fed in quite heavily into organizations' way of dealing with being compliant, and also having their policies, processes and procedures enforced. You must have accountability. So a responsible person, there must be accountability. I was reading the other day about how an employee had used AI and it was incorrect, and it was a research paper, and the individual said, well, it wasn't me, it was AI. So AI itself is never going to be held accountable for anything that it does of its own volition. Generative AI is a frightening piece of equipment, and it needs to be policed very, very carefully within the organizations that are using it, and hence back to accountability and roles. If you don't have exactly who is responsible for what, you can't go back then and find what was the problem in the first place. With that said, there also needs to be training. There needs to be people who are using AI need to be fully competent. And of course, there is also the requirement to ensure that you're balancing and I did steal this, you're balancing your enforcement, enablement and engagement. It's very important. This now for me was something excellent that I really stuck with me. I think that when it comes to the engagement piece, I would encourage businesses to go down the route of the just culture reporting that they use in aviation, which brings with it a space whereby people can self-report, or they can report others for incidents that have caused grave damage in the background, or could do so in the front. Your organization is better off knowing what's gone wrong, where it went wrong, and going back to get a fix on it. But you have to report it.
And get that oversight. And I mean, you're speaking in dire language here about the risks, but I think I like that point about balancing with engagement and education, because there are obviously huge opportunities here, right? We've all been impressed by the outputs that AI can provide us, but it's how they're being used, and who has oversight of that. And because ultimately we are, accountable for the decisions, right, that are being made. And I guess Vicky. Oh yeah. And I guess Vicky, kind of thinking about this point maybe, and then, kind of transparency. So what are the kind of different duties that we need to think about with making, AI usage transparent across the org?
So I think kind of to expand upon Caroline's point, and to summarize it, awareness. First and foremost, a business cannot input any kind of governance framework unless they are aware and fully aware of how they're going to be utilising AI, in what areas they're going to be utilising AI, what purpose AI has. So as a first step, I would encourage all businesses to be conducting a very, very robust and in-depth risk assessment. And then from there, you can build upon your competency piece. You can build in your robust communication channels, etc., your training channels, to ensure that awareness is then taken through and embedded across the business. Because I think without that, as I mentioned, without that kind of initial step of conducting a risk assessment, to understand where AI sits, it's not just necessarily about understanding what AI tools you're going to be using. It's understanding the why first and foremost. What's its purpose? What place does it have? What place does that tool have? And then you can communicate and train your business accordingly, to make sure that they're aware of those particular aspects.
And I guess, in all of this, there's a kind of dual concern, isn't there, about making sure that you're moving fast enough to, outcompete and perform, but also making sure that you're not going so far that you're exposing your business to unnecessary risk, or, improperly managing clients' data, your own data. So Dan, kind of, where would you say the kind of our clients who you speak to, where are they kind of feeling most? Are they worried about the competitive impacts of not being able to move fast enough? Or are they more concerned about the risk that they might be exposed to?
I think there's a nervousness, there's an uncertainty as to how they should approach it. I read somewhere that you don't necessarily need AI scientists involved in AI management system and governance of it internally. What you basically need is people that can understand risks, AI-related risks and limitations, and assess business impacts. They're just 2 or 3 of them. So it's once they engage with, okay, we're looking at AI, the AI Act, and see how it impacts on their business. But then they need to identify the people in their organization who should be addressing and looking at this. And once they've done that, they can then look at risk, compliance, and basically who governs it. So they're at the early stages, I would suspect. But I think as was mentioned earlier, AI is everywhere. It's in our social everyday lives, but it's also in business, and it's important. So it needs to be addressed in a particular way. And again, the framework around AI management is probably the best way of doing it. It certainly doesn't cover everything within the AI Act, but it certainly covers a lot of, and there is an alignment there with a number of different points. So I think to say it's important that they engage with the Act, engage with what's important about how AI is impacting on their organization, and identify the resources internally who can manage, implement, and maintain a proper framework.
So starting with, so we kind of talked there about, okay, what does this actually mean? This risk-based approach. where do customers need to kind of even start thinking about this? And it feels like, okay, first question, where is AI being used across your organization and for what purposes? And like an actual honest look at that, because you might think, oh, sure, the answer is no. I'm a manufacturing firm, we're not using AI. But actually, probably different people across your different teams, whether it's in finance, whether it's someone at the front desk using it to schedule, appointments, people are probably using it in different ways that you might not have full visibility on at the moment. So, thinking then about, okay, if you've, got a bit more visibility maybe in where people are using it across your organization, how do you then come to a kind of structured governance approach where you've got that confidence that you are, appropriately managing this and that you're fulfilling, your obligations under the EU AI Act, whether you're in Ireland or the UK, since as we discussed, it can be relevant for UK businesses as well. So, if you're running a business, what would you want to kind of establish first, Caroline? You've got this view of what's being used where, where would you want to start?
I would start with categorization. What are you using, just like you said, and I would. Obviously, there's the obvious things that you may be using as a business. So you may have a little chatbot who comes along and as part of your kind of customer service. So I suppose that ties back into Article 50 within the Act of Transparency. You're going to want to watch that very, very carefully, because I read something very interesting recently, and it was where a particular business's chatbot was swearing at the user and also had very negative things to say about the organization. So you're going to want to be very clear about what you have and what you know. Now, then we're moving into the known unknowns, where that there are people using it, but you're not sure what they're using it for. And this then ties back into the just culture reporting, whereby people can self-report, and it's non-punitive to an extent. If you're using AI to damage reputation, if you're using it for nefarious or any other activity and you self-report, well, I don't think you're going to have a job to come back to tomorrow. But that's not what just culture is intended to kind of support, is a grievous use of AI models or any other kind of machinery or otherwise. I think training is one of the second things that's the most important. I don't think that this is and my background, my bread and butter is training. And I don't think that this is something that you go to the internet and look up what's some good training and then deliver it. It needs to be delivered by individuals who are very well aware of the risks posed by the different models that are in use. Currently in the EU, we are using what would be considered low-risk AI models. But the reality is that although they're low-risk AI models, such as Vicky mentioned earlier on, so general practice AI, we're still seeing the use of generative AI. And that is, it reminds me of a movie, a space movie, where an alien gets in and through the air conditioning ducts, and any kind of small space, any little chink in the armor, has the probability to not only impact your organization, but as we've realized over the last couple of weeks, but it may go off and have something to do with your, competitors or not. So it's very, very important here that organizations are ensuring that training is coming in, but that it's appropriate training conducted by a professional. So you've got to have somebody who is very well aware of what the uses and the benefits are of using the AI model, but they also need to be able to capture people's attention, because death by PowerPoint is going to be a grave concern here, and you will lose people. People will go elsewhere in their mind. You know, there's a window they can look out at and watch the traffic. So it's very important that your AI training is engaging. That AI training will not only be about the great uses of the AI model that you're deploying, but also about how you are responsible as a user where it comes to your 42001 implementation certification, but also very much so for your AI Act kind of compliance. And we have recently set up in Ireland, very recently, the AI Office for Ireland, just on time delivery for the 2nd of August. But Ireland holds the EU presidency at the minute. And when a country holds the EU presidency, they look for maximum impact and they look to make changes and they look to make a lasting and positive impact. So our AI office here in Ireland isn't going to be, you know, having a holiday from here until the end of the year. It's going to be very, very active. And businesses both outside and inside the EU need to be aware of that. So training, competence, frameworks, policies, procedures, and train those as well, not just the AI training that's required.
And not just writing it down, I guess. Vicky, sorry, you're going to come in.
I was going to say, I think it kind of leads on nicely to what Caroline is saying here in terms of a question that we consistently get asked is kind of how do I go about this without drowning my business? And touching upon a point that we made earlier where we were talking about fears. I think this is one of the biggest fears that's coming out of people in terms of embedding the Act and its principles is this sounds like it's going to shroud my business, and that's not it at all. I think it's important to remember that oversight should scale with the use and risk and not be applied. Doesn't mean that it has to be applied at maximum capacity everywhere. So whilst it's incredibly important that we do those aspects and, you know, embed those aspects that Caroline was just mentioning, people shouldn't be put off by that. It doesn't need to mean that we have to turn our business into a prison, so to speak. That's not it. It's about scalability and it's about flex as well. And I think that's very much where a standard like 42001 could help. It doesn't mean compliance 100%, but it can help you input something that is flexible and is scalable.
I guess that's with everything, right? The system that you are running needs to be proportionate to what you're actually doing.
Exactly.
And you should be able to kind of show that, look, based on the amount of risk that we've determined this system presents, this is the level of oversight that we've decided. But look, you know, the EU AI Act, you know, when regulators are looking at, you know, whether businesses are following this, you know, when revenue come, they don't say, you know, had you got good intentions about paying your tax, or like, you know, do you believe in tax? They say, can I see your payslips? And where is your, how much have you coughed up, Jennifer? So, you know, similarly, you know, regulators are going to be looking for kind of proof of this good governance, not just sort of good intentions and, oh, well, we told everyone that they weren't to play with company data, and then we turn the other way. So Caroline, what kind of evidence and proof is going to be demanded here, really?
I think where a business is looking to implement this Act as best possible, again, with a very strong caveat that ISO 42001 does not make you necessarily compliant with the EU Act. However, there are a multitude, and I've got them here. There are many articles within the Act itself, but Article 17, Quality Management Systems, your ISO 9001, and then that feeds through just about every one of the standards. Document retention, so document control under ISO, corrective actions, duty to inform. So improvement as well, monitoring, measuring. We've got so much of the AI Act already embedded in the ISO 42001. Now, that also, it's true for 27. It's true for 9, like I said, but on a grander scale. Transparency here, when you're being audited, and any big business is going to be audited by multiple different bodies, who will effectively say, oh, if you're compliant with this act, then you may apply for this tender. If you do not hold this certification, please do not apply for the tender. We see that already. Okay, so tendering, kind of, once upon a time, businesses would send out their own people and they would go off and audit their providers or their suppliers. Look, businesses don't have that kind of money anymore. And as such, they look for certifications like 9, 14, 45, business continuity 22301. They look for information security systems 27, and now they're going to look for AI 42001 as well. And businesses, a very strong foot in the right direction, and to get started, use the ISO standards to implement. What happens when you use an AI or when you use an ISO standard is that you're setting up triple redundancy within your organization, because you will be asked the same question 3 times, but about maybe slightly different areas. And it forces you again to go back and check, do I have this in place? So from the perspective of what kind of levers can businesses employ for a start, then look to standards that are world recognized, that are proven, and that a lot of big businesses putting out tenders are looking for certification in today and will continue to do so in the future.
So I guess, yeah, so the different types of evidence that might be required under this are going to come back to those things like records, monitoring, evidence of review, evidence of continual improvement. And, I suppose a business can manage those systems in lots of different ways, but one specific way to do that might be through, ISO 42001, and that would provide a kind of known system for managing these obligations. And does certification then to ISO 42001 guarantee that you're okay? Can we say that?
Absolutely
Vicky?
not.
Absolutely not.
No, so I think that's the point that I think we've maintained throughout all of this, and that we need to be really clear on. Gaining that certification doesn't guarantee you compliance. It can sit parallel, and it will assist you in achieving that compliance. It will assist you in achieving that visibility needed for, to demonstrate that you've grasped it, you're aware of it, you're implementing it, you're embedding it. But it doesn't guarantee it, and I think that's a really, really key takeaway.
So it helps you set up the kinds of systems that are needed for compliance, but of course, still up to you to make sure that you are compliant under the law.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and then we've covered quite a lot of ground here. So across, the legal positioning differing between the UK and Ireland, obviously applying in Ireland, but also UK businesses also need to be conscious of their obligations under the Act. The role, the use, and the risk matter, and the implications, of course, could be financial, reputational, or kind of legal penalties. So very substantial risks to a business. Some kind of structured governance is definitely needed to support the accountability, the oversight, and to give you confidence that you are moving fast enough without incurring undue risk. So you need some kind of system to manage this. One way might be through ISO 42001, which offers, a clear and kind of structured approach. Although, of course, that doesn't guarantee that you are following the law, but it does provide a system to help you feel confident that you are. So I guess maybe one final kind of question for everyone, and I'll come to you first, Dan, but what's the kind of most important question that you think, business leaders should be asking about their organization's use of AI today?
how is AI governed within their business? Who is looking at this? Who has responsibility for it? I think just to go back slightly for a second and say, engagement with any ISO standard, not only does it, as Caroline said there, or suggested, that it impacts on tender opportunities and so on, but it does improve the processes within the organization itself. And where the focus, as I said, is external and what we can do because of other businesses looking for it. When they engage with it and take it on and look at the internal audit process, the engaging with different parts of the organization, whether they be monthly meetings, quarterly meetings, they're improving their own processes, which in turn will help their organization in all forms. But certainly, as I said, who's accountable for the risks and decisions within the organization. So it's a case of engaging with the Act and then saying, okay, 42 is something that we should engage with. We've already got 27 for the most part, and this is small, medium, or large organizations. It doesn't really doesn't suggest or mean that if you're a small organization that you're not impacted by this. You are. Every organization is in some way, shape, or form. So it's taking the first step, engage with the standard, and then see how it applies to or impacts on your organization.
I like what you said there, because you're quite right. Like, good governance means that you can actually then accelerate with your usage of AI across the org, right? But do so confidently, rather than just putting in a kind of blanket rule of nobody touch anything, everybody freeze, which is just not realistic in today's business context. Yeah. Vicky, I guess same question. What would you say the most important question is that people should be asking themselves?
It's kind of one question, but it's split into 4 key parts. So the Act itself is asking us to look at our business and ask ourselves what, where, how, and why are we utilising AI? And from there, if we answer those 4 key questions, then I think we can build upon efficient and effective governance based on the Act and its requirements.
Nice. I would brace for a much longer answer there. That was a very succinct 4-part answer. I love it. I need to get this skill of so much facts in such short words, so few words. Caroline, same question maybe. What's the most important question we should be asking ourselves as business leaders?
Am I being honest with myself? Am I being honest about my business, or am I cotton wooling? If you are not able to make that decision and you have got the, I would say, confidence to get somebody who is completely independent and obviously AI literate to come in, spend a week in your organization and come back and say to you, okay, this is what we have. Now let's see what you have. And that's going to tell you very quickly whether you're being honest with yourself or not. And that's what it is. It's about being very clear with yourself. It's about making sure that you're not saying, oh, that doesn't apply to me. Are you technically competent to say that? And if not, then find somebody who is.
Yeah, or else you're going to be really struggling to manage your obligations here.
For sure. And again, like Vicky said, is this going to, envelop my whole business? Am I going to be able to, see the wood for the trees? So it's about being very, very honest. And there's many reasons there for being very honest. And we've talked about the penalties. We've talked about the reputational damage. We've talked about client confidence, etc. And all of that is extremely important and will sink any business who is not being honest with themselves.
Yeah, important to be honest with yourself so you can manage it now, right? Rather than later down the road when it's caused
let's not let this snowball. It's not one of those things that you want to come up against in 6 months' time when you are in the High Court.
yeah, a dire prospect for any of our customers.
Yeah.
Beg your pardon. So listen, that was lots to think about. Thank you all for your time in chatting through. And for anyone watching, if you've got follow-up questions about ISO 42001 and how it can help you with your obligations under the EU AI Act, we've got a link in the box below. We offer training and certification, and we'd be delighted to hear from you and maybe talk through how we can help with your business. Do follow along for more content on our LinkedIn and socials. And thanks so much for joining today. Thanks all.
Thank you.